Years have passed, and the world has changed. But somewhere beyond the reach of time and reason, she still waits behind steel bars and flickering shadows, a white ghost pacing in silence, not for escape, but for something deeper, something older, a voice that once held her in the cold, a heartbeat she memorized before she ever knew her own name. He is gone, and yet not gone. Her body is captive, but her memory runs wild across forests and forgotten nights, across the space between loss and love. And when the fire comes and the locks fall away, she does not flee like the others. She stands, frozen eyes burning with something no one sees, because freedom means nothing without what was taken. And something inside her knows he is out there, still broken, still searching, still hers. This is not the story of a cage. It is the story of a bond that time could not break, of a silence louder than screams, of a wild thing that waited not to survive, but to be found. Each morning arrived the same, a pale slice of light, leaking through the cracks in the roof, painting thin gold lines across the concrete floor. She rose not from rest, but from habit. Her movements slow measured, not tired, but heavy. She circled the cage once, twice, then lay back down, her great body folding. Into silence outside, there were sounds, distant calls, clanging metal voices that never meant her. But she listened anyway. Every day she pressed her nose to the same corner where once the scent of forest clung stubborn and fading. She licked the iron out, of ritual, not hunger. Her eyes tracked shadows across the wall, not to hunt, but to remember. And when the handlers brought meat, she ate without pleasure, chewing like someone remembering how to breathe. And in the stillness, when the noise died and dusk stretched across the world, she would close her eyes and see it again. Not a place, but a presence. Not the jungle, not the cage, but the boy, the warmth of his coat, the rhythm of his voice, saying her name like a promise, Shira. And even now, though her world was cold and small, the sound of it remained tucked deep in her chest like a flame refusing to die. She never roared, not once, not since they took her, and yet every breath she drew was a kind of waiting, as if somewhere inside her, something new. The story was not finished. Not yet. It happened without warning one morning, colder than the rest. He didn't come. She waited through the long hours, her ears twitching at every sound, her body still as stone, expecting the familiar footsteps, the low murmur, the hand on her fur. But the sun rose and fell, and still he did not return. Then strangers arrived, faces she did not know, voices sharp and fast, their hands rough and smelling of fear. They pulled her away from everything, the scent of him, the place where they slept, the rhythm of his presence. She roared, then wild, desperate not to fight, but to call out, to ask where he was, to demand the return of what had been hers. But he never came. No voice answered her cries. Only the thud of a metal gate closing. Behind her, and silence thicker than chains in the new place. There were no trees, no wind, just walls and bars and days that bled into one another. She paced at first, eyes wild, nose pressed to every surface, searching for a sign. But none came. She lay down and stopped calling, stopped expecting time, moved around her, but inside her, it froze. The world dulled into shapes and noises. She learned not to look at people, not to hope her body grew, but something inside her shrank, curled tight around a wound that would not close years past. And though she no longer remembered the sound of his laughter, she remembered his warmth, the way he said her name, like it meant something, like she meant something. Shira. The silence between then and now stretched endlessly, a void where she lived but did not feel, and in that hollow quiet, something ancient waited, watched, endured. Let me pause here for a moment and ask you, where are you listening to this story from? Have you ever had someone, a person or even an animal, remember you after long, silent years? That quiet, unexpected moment of recognition that shakes something deep inside you? If stories like this speak to your heart, make sure to follow. There's more ahead that just might stay with you. He hadn't spoken her name in years, not out loud, not even in thought, afraid it might break him open. But then, one evening, long after he'd stopped searching, he saw it, a grainy video online, barely 30 seconds long. A flash of white muscle behind bars, smoke, rising screams, and in the center of it a tiger. Not just any tiger. He knew the way she moved, that tilt of the head, that stillness. It was her, it had to be. She was alive, and something inside him that had long gone cold cracked open, flooded with heat and ache and disbelief. His hands shook as he replayed the video over and over, trying to be sure, but his heart already knew. And with that knowing came the questions. What if she didn't remember? What if she'd changed? What if the years had erased him from her? The way the world said they should, but deeper still, louder than fear, came the memory of her eyes. The way she looked at him like he was the only thing that made sense. He had abandoned her, not by choice, but by silence, by not fighting harder. And now he had a choice. Go back and risk finding nothing, or stay and carry the guilt forever. The decision felt impossible, but in the end, it wasn't, because sometimes the past doesn't call softly. It burns, and when it does, you don't walk. You run. And so he did. Breathless, desperate. Not for redemption, but for the chance to know if love remembers, if memory survives. The silence. He didn't know what he'd find. He only knew he had to go. At first, there was only the smoke curling between them, the distance full of shapes and noise, his heart pounding so loud he could barely hear his own voice when he called her name again. Softer this time, Shira, and through the haze she turned slowly, deliberately, her eyes catching his, and the world fell silent. In that moment, the years dissolved. She didn't rush toward him. She didn't roar or tremble. She just looked, her gaze holding his like a question that already knew the answer. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, only watched as she took one step, then another, each one slow, as if the earth itself was waiting, holding its breath. Her massive body moved with quiet certainty, no fear, no rage, only memory. The way her ears tilted forward, the slight lowering of her head, the flick of her tail. It was her, and she knew him not as a stranger, not as a ghost, but as something still hers. When she reached him, she paused just a breath away. He didn't speak, didn't dare blink, and then gently she leaned in her nose, brushed his chest, and she exhaled a sound so low, so deep. It felt like the earth beneath them sighed. She lay down, pressing her head into his lap, just as she once had. In the quiet nights, long ago when she was small enough to fit in his arms, he dropped to his knees, fingers trembling as they touched the thick fur. He remembered the scent, the warmth, the weight of her, and everything inside him broke, not from pain, but from release, from the unbearable truth that she remembered him, not just in body, but in soul. He buried his face into her neck and wept for all the years lost, for every night she waited, for every time he told himself she would have forgotten. But she hadn't. Not her, not this bond. It had waited, survived, and now it returned full and real and undeniable. She didn't need words, and neither did he. In that silence, everything was said. In the days that followed, they stayed close, not out of fear, but out of need. She walked beside him, not guarded, but open, her eyes softer, her steps lighter, as if some weight had finally slipped from her back. Sometimes she would brush against him gently, just enough to feel the warmth of his presence, and he would rest his hand on her shoulder, not with ownership, but reverence. Small things began to return. She followed his voice again, tilted her head at the way he laughed at nothing sometimes at night. When the world was quiet, he'd hum without knowing, and she would come closer, lay near him and listen like she used to as a cub. And when he reached out, she didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch, slow, deliberate like trust growing back bone by bone. Once he threw a worn glove toward her, and she caught it between her teeth, a flicker of play, old habits breaking through the silence. He smiled. She didn't understand the expression, but she felt its warmth, and flicked her tail in answer. They didn't speak, but everything was said in gestures, in the way she circled him, before lying down, in how he cleaned her fur with steady, careful hands, in how neither looked away anymore. They had been apart longer than they had been together, but that didn't matter. Time had bent around their bond. It had stretched it, tested it, but not broken it. And now in the quiet of this return, no grand declarations were needed. Only presence, only breath and heartbeat and memory. Still alive, not a second chance, but a continuation. Something ancient rediscovered. Something true and without words. Both of them knew the same thing. Love that waits is love that lasts. And sometimes, even after all the silence, the story still finds its way home. Some bonds are not built through words, but through presence, through breath, shared in silence and time held in memory. They survive absence. They survive forgetting, because they are not made of moments, but of meaning. What was lost was never truly gone. It was only waiting. Waiting for the quiet, for the courage, for the right moment to return. And when it did, it asked for nothing except to be felt again. Gently, wholly, without explanation. And now in the stillness after fire, after years after, everything. They are not what they were. They are something stronger, shaped by distance, but not broken by it, healed not by time, but by love that endured. It came back, not loudly, but exactly when it was needed, to remind them that what matters most never leaves, it only waits to be found again.